There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Shawn Breeze Books. Welcome back to my channel and my most anticipated new releases for the winter season of 2026. It's a long list. Let's get started. Coming out in January, and when I say it's coming out in January, that means it's coming out somewhere in the world in January. So you'll have to do your own research beyond that. But this actually is coming out December 31st, 2025, so I decided to include it. It is called The Work of Our Hands, a Cree Meditation on the Real World by Adrian Sutherland. With 22 ratings, it's got a 4.64 rating on Goodreads already. Adrian Sutherland is a Juno-nominated Cree musician. I've never heard of him, but I don't pay attention to music particularly. And it's a meditation and kind of a memoir, but he's exploring his world and the nature of being alive, perhaps, through what we do with our hands. So, in his case, his hands hold a guitar, a hammer, a rifle, or a canister used to carry water to his family home. And also the materials from which a traditional Cree sweat lodge is constructed. So that sounds lovely. A bit more about Adrian Sutherland. He is from Attawattapiskat, I think I'm pronouncing that right, which is on the remote coast of the James Bay. Singer, songwriter, musician, recording artist, and frontman and founder of the Roots Rockers band. Is that a genre? Roots Rockers? Midnight Shine. Next, a novel out of Australia by an author named Liz Allan. A novel called In Bloom. A story of class and coming of age. And the premise is that a group of best friends, probably high school in Vincent, Australia, described in the blurb as a shitty coastal town. Accusations are made against their teacher. And so that's the premise of the coming-of-age novel. And here is a South African novel by a black writer. We don't get too many of those in the West, which is regrettable. And this one's published in Canada by McClelland and Stewart. So that's a Canadian publisher, to the degree that any of the big multinational publishers are of a particular nation. It's a very debatable point. We Inherit the Fire by Kagiso, Lesego, Molope. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I will do due diligence later. Concerns a mother-daughter relationship in the tumultuous apartheid era, late 1980s. I think that sounds fabulous. She has written a bunch of other books. Next is the first novel by a Pakistani writer that I have had his short story collection on my shelf for years. Daniyal Mueenuddin's novel, This Is Where the Serpent Lives. His short story collection, In Other Rooms, Other Wonders, has been on my shelf, like I say, forever. Must get to it. One of these days, probably should get to it before tackling the novel, but not going to promise anything. It got lots of book prizes, the short story collection. This novel, This Is Where the Serpent Lives, goes back and forth between rural Pakistan and city, urban Pakistan, contrasting extreme wealth, extreme poverty. I don't need to know any more than that. So, love the cover, don't you? I read this Australian writer's earlier novel. His name is Michael Mohammed Ahmad, and Bugger is his new one. And it's also about bullying, and I am interested in reading about bullying because it's a big part of my biography. The one that I read a few years ago was The Lebs, which I didn't love but enjoyed. Also set in high school. This is his fourth novel. The protagonist is 10 years old at the beginning, and he's horrendously bullied. Oh, this one really sounds like a Shawn book. This, My Second Life. This, My Second Life by Patrick Charnley. Set in Cornwall, which for some reason, just because of reading various novels, I'm interested in Cornwall. So anything set there is of immediate interest. About a young man in Cornwall coming to terms with a life-changing injury. Jagos, 24, goes to stay with his uncle on his small coastal farm. That's all I need to know about that. But, that sounds good. It is his debut. Next is Iluka by Cassie Stroud. Family drama, which always is of interest to me. After a grandfather's death, the siblings are gathered together. The title comes from the name of their beach house, their Fibro beach house. Here is a Moroccan-British novel called Tangerinn by Emanuela Anechoum, translated from the Italian by Lucy Rand. All about migration, searching for belonging, culture identity between London and the windswept beaches of southern Italy. I shouldn't say it's a Moroccan-British, it's more probably Italian-British, but the protagonist's father was born in Morocco, and so she then goes home to Morocco. So it's set in all those places, which makes it sound that much more interesting. Emanuela Anechoum lives in Italy. The next one is interesting because of what the title suggests it's going to be about, and the fact that it's written by two authors. Very few books these days are, and this one is Korean. It's called Two Women Living Together by Kim Hana and Hwang Sunwoo, translated from the Korean by Jean Ping. This is actually not a novel. This is a memoir co-written by two best friends, flouting gender norms and societal expectations, with their decision to live together and grow old under one roof. The implication is that it's not a lesbian relationship, but I'm not going to rule that out. It does sound like a fascinating memoir with various cultural reflections on Korean society. I hesitate to say that this is one of my most anticipated novels because I am so far behind with this guy's output. He's one of my favorite writers, but his last two books, I don't think, three. He had two short ones. I have them all. I haven't got to the two short ones, and then 2 years ago, he had another novel that I really want to get to, and I haven't. But this is queer French writer Édouard Louis' newly translated novel, Monique Escapes, translated from the French by John Lambert. It's more autofiction. It starts with him having a phone call with his mother, who reveals that her partner is an alcoholic and emotionally abusive. Sounds like an Édouard Louis autofictional novel, indeed. And it's a shorty, too, 130 pages. Okay, this one is definitely much anticipated. Do you remember that debut novel that caused such a storm when it came out 7 or 8 years ago? My Absolute Darling by Gabriel Tallent. I have been waiting for something else by him, and it is coming out in January. It's called Crux. Now, My Absolute Darling, I loved it so much, but I hated the ending, so I think I had to knock a star. I should have knocked a star off, because it was the kind of ending that was just being written for a film option, like to make a movie of it. No, it didn't fit the rest of the book, but I thought it was a tremendous work of fiction, especially debut literary fiction, up until that point. So this is his second one, and Gabriel Tallent was raised by lesbian parents, so he's a very interesting fellow. Crux is about intense friendship and grit. We start when they're in high school, and I don't know if it's two boys or not. The characters' names are Dan and Tama, double M, Tama, but that's the premise, and then we follow them into adulthood. That one I hope to get to shortly after it comes out. Next is a novel set in the Canadian North. There isn't very much fiction like that I know of. This is called Northern Bull by Michelle Swallow, and it is set in Yellowknife, specifically on a cold, dark January day. If you don't know, that far north, there's only 4 or 5 hours of daylight a day for months on end, if I'm remembering correctly. And our hero, or anti-hero, is a down-on-his-luck fisherman who needs to convince his landlord not to tear down his ramshackle house. That sounds fabulous. Michelle Swallow is a settler writer based in Yellowknife. Now, this is a reissue, and I'm including it here because this is canonical. To the degree that queer literature has a canon, I would say this guy would be on it. Francis King's novel, A Domestic Animal. Originally published in 1970. I have not read any Francis King. McNally editions. The protagonist is a brilliant young Italian philosopher who comes somewhere, America, it's not clear, but to either the UK or America, that would be my guess, to study, and moves in with a successful middle-aged novelist. Oh my. And the last one I have for January, and that's quite a few for January, is a queer novel from India. It's called The Tree, the Well, and the Drag Queen by Salini Vaneeth. And it's about a Mumbai-based drag queen who has to return to their ancestral village to confront their opponent. And their opponent is a demonic jackfruit tree. So there's probably some magical realism in there that I might not like, but it still is worth investigating. And Salini Vanith is a female writer based in Bangalore. So now we're on to February. And this one, the first one I have for February, just it sounds incredible. It's nonfiction. It's called Women Among Monuments, Solitude, Permission, and the Pursuit of Female Genius by Cassie Van Schaik. This is a lyrical meditation on the obstacles women, artists, and writers face, with a very provocative premise expressed this way. What does it take for a woman to don the mantle of genius? Fascinating. It includes the following artists in its meditation: Georgia O'Keeffe, Gertrude Stein, Jamaica Kincaid, Leslie Marmon Silko, and so on. So it's a memoir interwoven with biographies, focusing on female solitude, constraint, and perseverance. Sounds fascinating. I'm interested in Irish literature, and here is a memoir that sounds pretty interesting. It's called The Irish Goodbye, and the subtitle is Micro-Memoirs. So I guess it's like flash fiction, but it's memoir, by Beth Ann Fennelly. Some of these micro-memoirs are as short as a sentence and some longer. It's about a quote-unquote ordinary woman and the minutiae and the interstitial interactions that make up a life. Yeah, that does sound interesting. Here is a British novel. No. Okay, so this one is a bit confusing because the publisher is British, Hamish Hamilton, but it's set in southern Appalachia. The novel is called Fancy Gap. The author is Zach Jones, and Jones is considered Canadian because it's very complicated. He's a Canadian-American writer, having grown up in rural North Carolina and Toronto. Lives in Toronto, I believe. And the publisher is British. I presume it's coming out by an American publisher later, but there's no information about that I can find. The novel is set in the isolated mountain enclaves of southern Appalachia. The protagonist leaves her family behind and joins a kind of weird religious flock. She becomes a charismatic preacher. And it's about the lives of her kids, who hopefully aren't as woo-woo as she is. Did I say that out loud? Title is interesting. Fancy Gap. So is the cover. Here is a work of nonfiction I'm very interested in. It's called Talk Treaty to Me: Understanding the Basics of Treaties and Land in Canada by Crystal Gale Fraser and Sarah Komarniski. I think the title is self-explanatory, and I look forward to checking it out. Here is a novel by an American writer based in Brooklyn. His name is Grant Ginder, and the novel is So Old, So Young. A story of romantic love, professional jealousy, and really the story of lifelong friendships between a group of 6 people. It's structured with 5 parties over 20 years that bring these college friends together. Yeah, I really like the sound of that one. Here is a novel by a Hong Kong author. I refuse to say that Hong Kong is part of China, so we're just going to go with the fact that it's not. And it's called Everyday Movement by Gigi Leong, translated in the Chinese by Jennifer Feely. 2 female protagonists as democracy starts to crumble in Hong Kong. That sounds absolutely fascinating. As far as Goodreads knows, it's the only work by this author. Next is a debut novel by an American writer called Lost Lambs, and it's a family drama, dysfunctional family drama about the Flynn family. And their nemesis, or the villain in the piece, is a billionaire shipping magnate. Yeah, I'd have to read some early reviews of that. It's coming out in the UK in February. It's actually coming out in January in the States, I now see. And here is a work of fiction by a Saskatchewan writer who I know slightly, and he's a good friend of my good friend, David Carpenter. The Laundryman by Dwayne Brenna, and coming out from Shadowpaw Press. And it is set back in history. 1883. It's set in Prince Albert, which is now Saskatchewan. It was in the Northwest Territories until 1905. And it's a murder investigation. But I've really got my fingers crossed that it will be much more than a murder mystery or a work of genre that some people call historical fiction. I'm hoping it's a meaty novel. The queer writer Curtis Garner is in danger of becoming one of those writers who I haven't read yet but keep buying their books and hoping to get to them. Isaac came out a couple years ago, very well received, on my shelf. I remember loving the opening paragraph of it when I hauled it. And now he has, I believe, his second novel coming out in February called Orange. Set in Cornwall. There's another Cornwall setting in a novel, 2018. And then the other timeline is 2023 in East London. The protagonist, Daniyal, is 16 in the earlier setting, and he is that much older in 2023. And living a very gay life. Yes, that sounds fabulous. Here's another queer novel by a British-Canadian writer. His name is Ellis Scott, and he was born in the UK and grew up in Canada. Night Terminus is the title. And this is his first novel, and it sounds pretty darn interesting. It's put out by a publisher I know nothing about called Rare Machines. It begins with a chance encounter in 1985, a one-night stand, and then follows one of those two people, Louis, to Montreal, Europe, the Iranian desert, and so on. But there is some more overlap between these two characters. Oh, Rare Machines is an imprint of Dundurn Press that focuses on experimental literary fiction. I'm not so sure about the experimental part, but the literary fiction part sounds interesting. An Irish or Irish-American novel called Saoirse by Charlene Hurtubise. It's set between the US and Ireland about a woman who runs from her past and the secrets. So very generic and very interesting sounding premise. Between Michigan in particular and Donegal. And the writer, Charlene Hurtubise, lives in Dublin, but was born in Florida. It's her second novel, an Indian novel called Rail Song by Rahul Bhattacharya, about a woman forging a life for herself on the railways in newly independent India. Bhattacharya was born in Bombay and lives in Delhi. That's it for February, so now on to March, and there's fewer for March. An American novel called I Am Agatha by Nancy Foley. Agatha is a painter with a bristly personality who has fled to rural New Mexico. She has a lot of rough edges and is the most unsentimental, cranky person in the world, but she takes a shining to a widow who has a deepening case of dementia, who's keeping steady vigil at her daughter's backyard grave. That sounds like such a Shawn book. Nancy Foley is a New Mexican writer, and this is her debut novel. Colm Toibin has a new short story collection. I'm not aware that he's ever had one published before, but I'm not necessarily in the know on that. But this one is called The News from Dublin, and it comes out in March. Cornwall is a theme for this winter 2026 in terms of the books I'm most interested in. And here is one that's a little bit obscure, but I'm all over it. It's called Wilkie Collins on Cornwall, a selection of his writings about Cornwall. He wasn't born there, but he often traveled there because of his health problems, including gout and rheumatism, and Cornwall's milder climate was therapeutic. Cornwall is a setting for much of his writing. Yeah, I have read The Woman in White and Armadale. And didn't he write one called Basil, too? Yeah, I read Basil, too, as an undergrad. Basil or Basil. But because I'm so interested in Cornwall and mildly interested in Collins, that's why it's here. And here is an Irish novel set in County Wexford. The Visit by Neil Tully. Tender portrait of a small town under pressure. I don't need to know anything else. Small town fiction is my bag. I believe it's his debut. And the last one for March and for this video is a short story collection by Louise Erdrich. I'm not aware that she's had short story collections, but I'm probably blanking on that. This one's called Python's Kiss. Comes out at the end of March. Can't wait. All right, that is my most anticipated releases. Which one of these most interests you? Thanks for watching.